Good day, everyone. I'm Michael Kerman of Leading Edge Seminars in Toronto, where the sun is shining today. Welcome you all to this virtual lunch together with Lynn Grodzki. I want to thank all of you for joining us. It should be an interesting hour, and I want to give special thanks to JK Seminars in the United States, who is spreading the word to their clientele, and to the Ontario Association of Mental Health Professionals. I've appreciated all the feedback we've received over the last couple of weeks. Thank you very much again for joining us, telling us how this is going for you. And we all know while we're watching this, these are very hard times for a lot of people. And we're thinking of friends, family, and people in the healthcare world who are doing amazing, courageous work. And we're here together for this hour to look at other things. I want to tell you a few things about this platform first. This is Livestorm. We've had good luck with it. You have a question box in your upper right, and anytime you want, you can send a question. If there are technical problems, you can let us know by asking a question about it. You might want to restart your computer or deal with it the best you can. But do know that this 1 hour session and everything we're doing online is available on demand on our website. And as soon as this is over, you'll get a link to it. So if you get frustrated, and it's only happened a little bit, just know that you'll be able to see the whole thing in an hour. I just want to let you know what the three things we're doing at Leading Edge. We used to be only a company that had workshops in downtown Toronto and a couple of other places occasionally. We've been doing it for 25 years. But now we're doing three things. We're having two more virtual lunches tomorrow. John Briere, who is one of the top trauma treatment people, and he's working on the front lines in LA. And it should be a very interesting session with John. We're coming back next Monday for the next virtual lunch after John, and we're going to have Roy Kiesling, who's one of the most innovative EMDR teachers, practitioners, and he'll be with us talking about EMDR today. We're also offering 2 hour mini webinars. Now, these are hopefully immediately relevant to you right now, to the current situation. They come with CEs, they cost $40. They're live and interactive for those who can make it, and they're also archived as webinars on our website. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have Janina Fisher on creating connection, and on Saturday, we're going to have the developer of the polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges, who's a scientist, speaking in conversation with Deb Dana, who's a therapist. We'll have that link up later today. We'll also be having Terry Real and other very, very interesting people. In a few weeks' time, our spring series begins, and instead of being in a room in Toronto, it'll be virtual. It'll be all day with interaction, with the opportunity for small meeting rooms on the net. So Frank Anderson, who's one of the leaders in the internal family systems world, is doing a 2-day workshop. We'll archive it in modules. You don't have to be there or watch it in parts. It should be very helpful. All this information is on leadingedgeseminars.org. So that's the pitch at the beginning. And I want to tell you a few things now about Lynn Grodzki. I have a feeling many of you watching know have been trained by Lynn Grodzki, and others of you are interested in private practice and might not have heard of Lynn Grodzki because you never thought you'd be moving in that direction before. It's possible. Lynn Grodzki is a licensed social worker. She's a master certified coach, and she has worn several hats in her life. She's a former business executive. She's a psychotherapist in private practice. And for years, she's worked with change agents like social workers, coaches, psychologists, and other helping professionals to move into and support their private practices. Through her workshops, her 5 books, the resources on our websites, she's known as a pioneer in this field of private practice building, and she's trained thousands of non-business oriented professionals to operate small businesses that offer them a high degree of integrity as well as an enhanced financial success. Her first book that really created quite a stir, and it is the best-selling book on this topic, is called Building Your Ideal Private Practice, and it's been a bestseller. And it's been called the Bible it should be the Bible of any clinician looking into private practice. So Lynn, welcome to our screen and thank you for joining us today.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Lynn.
So nice to see you.
Nice to see you
No, it's been
in
a while.
over spring. So Lynn, first I'd like to ask you the question I'm asking everybody because this crisis is affecting all of us. How has it been for you in the last while?
Well, I feel like I'm just like everybody. It's stressful. It's forcing me to be more flexible in the way I think and the way that I work so that I can accommodate those therapy clients that I see. And I also work nationally and internationally with a lot of healing professionals. So I'm hearing a lot from them about the things that are concerning them right now.
Mhm. What are the particular concerns you're hearing now that you hadn't heard before because this crisis is going on?
Well, I think the things that are different are that everybody has moved online. And for some people, that's kind of been an easy transition. And they just had maybe individual clients that they were working with one-on-one, and those clients are comfortable online or by phone. But there are other people who are not finding it so easy. So I'm hearing concerns from them about client retention, because clients are saying, I don't know if I really need this right now, and I don't know if I really like this kind of online relationship with you. So that's one thing I'm hearing. I'm also hearing from people who say, you know, I'm worried about my own finances. I can do this for a while if my client count is down, but I didn't really plan for this. So just not having that kind of a plan in place for a crisis like this. And then in a completely opposite way, there are some people who are absolutely flooded with new clients because a lot of people are really anxious right now and feeling depressed and lonely. And so they feel overwhelmed and like they've just kind of reached the limit of what they can do and who they can see. And it's causing some secondary anxiety for them. So I guess that's a way of saying, Michael, it's kind of across the board. And one thing I just want everybody to know is that even though we're all in this together, we're not the same. Our practices are as different and unique as each one of us are. So if you're having some struggles and one of your closest friends or acquaintances or therapist colleagues is not, it doesn't mean there's anything to blame. It's just this is hitting different practices in different ways.
What I'm noticing talking to therapists who are joining us for lunch in our mini webinars is that there's so much to deal with. You're dealing with your own life. You're dealing with watching the news all the time, worrying, and then you have your clients, and some people have never been online before and learning what that's all about, confidentiality, everything else. And now if you're in private practice, is learning after learning after learning while a crisis is going on.
Yeah.
I'd like to go ahead, and then we're going to go back a little memory lane conversation with you.
So I guess the one, as a business coach, I end up having all these mantras that I'm always saying over and over to people. And one of them that keeps coming up right now is to remind people that it's times like these where we start to evolve as human beings. It speeds up our evolution personally and professionally. And so what I'm asking people to do is to kind of assist rather than resist this evolution. Things are changing and they may never quite go back in the same way that they were before. So if you can stay curious and you can stay flexible and kind of fluid in your thinking, it's easier during a time of evolution.
Very good advice. I want to go back, speaking of evolution, most people who go to social work school go on and practice social work, but you have a very interesting background, a business background. You've really combined knowledge from the therapy world and the business world. Can you tell us a little bit of how you started, how you evolved from that social worker to being the leading person in terms of private practice development?
Yeah, thank you for that question. If you go back even further, I was a hippie in the 70s, and I ended up in 1975 having a 4-year-old and as a single parent with no other source of support. And even though I'd been traveling the country in a school bus, I came home to my parents, and they were pretty shocked to see the situation I was in, and went back to school. I hadn't completed my university degree, and I went back to school for design because I loved art. So I got a degree in print design, and then I looked at what you could earn as a designer and thought, oh, this will never do. I better take some business courses. And I just really liked business. And when my father got wind of the fact that I was taking business courses, he invited me over to his house one afternoon for this very formal meeting where he invited me into his company to work in his company. And I agreed. And his company was a scrap metal recycling company. So I became, over time, the general manager of this company. And I wore a hard hat and steel-toed shoes. And it was a real rough and tumble business, and not a fun business for a woman to be in. And eventually not the right business for me. But I learned a lot about entrepreneurship in that business because nothing happened unless the business made it happen. So I learned about marketing, and I learned about sales, and I learned about profit, and all kinds of things that as a designer, as an artist, I knew nothing about. During that time, I also went into therapy for myself because I was so confused about what I was doing, and really came to love therapy, what it did for me, and wanted to become a therapist. So like a lot of people, it became a second career for me to go back to school. And I went to school as a clinical social worker. And during that time, right after school, in my area in Washington, D.C., I was married to an architect, and we had a bit of a recession in the construction field in the late 1980s. And one day my husband came home from work early, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I was laid off." And up till that time, I hadn't been really working on building my practice. I mean, it was just a small little thing. But now I knew what to do because I'd been trained in business, that when business got low, you developed a marketing plan and you worked your marketing plan. So I was able to really build my business pretty quickly. And as I talked to colleagues about it, I realized this wasn't the normal way for therapists to think, that most therapists never had a business background. And I started teaching classes locally to therapists that were worried about managed care and the changes in the insurance industry, and wrote a book. And that book was just like the right book at the right time. So I still work as a therapist to this day, but I also began to work as a business coach. And that book led to a lot of other books and to teaching people really internationally. I did a lot of travel to Australia, to Europe, to Canada, came up to Toronto a couple times, and across the United States. So I hear from a lot of therapists, and I have this great position kind of as an overview. And I feel like I'm a translator for a lot of my clients, translating business into what I would call ethical commerce. Because as therapists, we have a special take on business. We need to reconcile service with profit. And a lot of other businesses don't need to do that, but we do. So we have to keep it really ethical.
Yeah, what I've noticed when I went to social work school too, and my colleagues back in the 70s also, the last thing they wanted to do was go into business. They wanted to work with people, help people. My background was working with kids. And you're offering a way of looking at what they could do with their life that was very different than when they started. What was some of the early reactions when you were saying to people? Probably a lot of people thought, I'm a great therapist, word of mouth will do it. Everyone knows how terrific I am. I'll see some clients, they'll tell their friends, and I'm ready to go. My business will thrive. That's my guess. Were those the kind of things you were hearing then?
Yes, well, it was true for some people. And it had been true for a long time. Like that's all you needed to do was kind of put your shingle out and talk to a few people and your practice would fill. But things were changing. In the late 90s, things were really changing a lot. And it wasn't working for a lot of people. And that's why I started to teach and started to write, because people were saying, I don't know what to do. and I have these skills, and I'm not filling a practice, and I really have deep affection for therapists. I feel like, therapists work so hard and do so much, and I wanted to see them thrive in their businesses. So to do that, I felt like therapists, like you were describing, they needed an education, but it had to be in a way that they could understand. It had to be values based, and kind of with enough metaphors and with enough examples that they felt like, oh, I could do this. I get it.
Thinking of evolution again, and we can talk more about therapists, but then you evolved to helping therapists think about coaching as something else that they could do. So tell us a little about how you made that evolution from private practice therapists and the addition of coaching to their practice.
Sure. Well, in 1996, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I was telling her, kind of a supervisory conversation. I was telling her about the work I was doing as a therapist with a client, where I was strategically very invested in helping him get a promotion at work, at his work. And she said to me in a very nice way, but a very clear way, she said, I'm not really sure that that's therapy, Lynn. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, maybe some kind of coaching. And I'd never heard that term before. But I thought, well, if I'm doing something like that, I better get trained. So I found a virtual training school for coaching and enrolled. And I was really interested in the business courses, the business coaching, because I kind of missed business. And as I learned more about business coaching approaches, I realized that the people that needed this the most were my colleagues. So that fed into my teaching and my writing, that I could do it from a coaching approach, which is a whole different approach to the way that you work with people. It's just different than therapy, although many therapists adopt and adapt part of that approach. In its purest sense, it was new to me and something that I hadn't learned before. So I became a coach and a therapist. And then in 2018, I published a book so that therapists could see how I was working as a therapist by bringing some really powerful coaching strategies into my clinical sessions. I'd adapted some ways that I had learned to coach so that they'd fit for the principles and purposes of therapy. And that's really the way that I work as a therapist now. I call it Therapy with a Coaching Edge. And that was the title of that book in 2018. And it's just a lot of therapists are doing this naturally. And it's just a way to help explain and validate a different approach, a shorter term approach.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit more about the differences between therapy and coaching? I'm sure there's an overlap, and then there are differences. So
Yeah, there is an overlap, and then there are some differences. One of the differences is that the hallmark of coaching is action. So if you're a coach, you're expected to know how to get people into action really quickly, maybe in the first single session. But as a therapist, sometimes that's the last thing that you want somebody to do, that you would much rather have them develop some insight before they take their next step, because they're not taking good steps. So there's a kind of a different philosophical approach for therapy than with coaching. And again, I know some therapy is solution oriented and some of it is strategic. So there are ways that therapy does bring in action. But in coaching, this is true for all coaching, that you try to make things very actionable. You also are in a very different position with your clients. There's an old story that coaches talk about in terms of helping somebody learn to ride a bicycle. And this story is that if you're a consultant and you're teaching somebody to ride a bike, maybe you're standing off to the side with a clipboard and you're assessing their bike riding skills and telling them what could be better, and then handing them a report and riding off into the sunset yourself. And if you're a therapist, maybe you're standing closer to them and you're curious, how did you learn to hold your arms that way? And I see your feet don't reach the pedals. Why do you think that might be? And you're riding in circles. And was that your intention? And if you're a coach, you climb on the back of the bike and say, where do you want to go today? So, this is not always correct, right? Because there are a lot of variations to the way therapy and coaching and consulting works, but it just is a different way of relating to clients. But in that relationship, you do learn some skills as a coach that can, once adapted, are really powerful in therapy.
Interesting. So I'm going to make a guess here that all people who come into therapy and coaching come because there's an issue or problem that they want to deal with. For a lot of people coming to therapy, it could be a very long-standing problems with anxiety, depression, relationship problems, self-image, self-esteem issues. And you're working with those over time and dealing with their life as it is now. But with coaches, does a lot have to do what's happening in their organization. There's been a shuffle. I lost a job. I have a new responsibility. It's starting tomorrow.
Yeah, it can be that the issues are much more present day and future oriented. And with therapy, there's a lot of trauma that informs a therapeutic issues. So we need to go back into people's history with them. As a coach, especially because a lot of coaches are not trained therapists. You don't want those coaches doing that. You don't want them working within trauma and somebody's past.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a lot of great coaches that are therapists, and they have more flexibility about what they can do. But usually, coaching is more oriented in the present and the future. And therapy can be present, future, and of course, past. So that's a difference. And, if you've got a coaching client, a life coaching client, you might never work face-to-face with that person. And so, you need to be careful and screen for what's a therapeutic issue and when to refer out versus what's a coaching issue.
Are there differences in terms of how long people stay in therapy or coaching? That's a generalization, but what do the stats tell us?
I don't know about the facts, but I tend to feel that the way that coaching is designed, it's designed for results in every session. Okay, and that was a big learning I had as a coach that I hadn't learned as a therapist, is how to set up a session so that you would actually get results at the end of that session each and every time. And that's a coaching structure that, again, I've adapted now for shorter term therapy. So I think coaching is thought to be shorter termed, single session, flexible, so that people are meeting in the boardroom or in coffee shops. Whereas with therapy, because of the issues that we're talking about, we need a lot more containment.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I was just reflecting on when you've come to Toronto and done a one-day workshop. It kind of begins with kind of an overview and information, but by the end of the day, people are making plans.
Yeah.
It's not like a coach. Like, it's not just we're going to listen to the theory. You're going to leave today with a plan. You're going to know what you're going to do tomorrow, next week. You're going to, tell us more about how you evolved that way of teaching private practice development.
Well, I think that somewhere along the line, I learned to become very strategic. And I'm very interested in the how, not just the what and the who of a problem, but also how are we going to resolve this? And how do I help you get from A to Z? And so I brought that into my books and my workshops as a coach, so that therapists always leave at the end of a workshop, just like I know we're going to be doing a webinar, and therapists will leave at the end of the mini webinar with a plan to deal with the coronavirus. So it's not just going to be a discussion, it's going to be strategic for people that need to know, what do I do now, or how do I protect my practice for the future?
I'm going to ask you maybe some tough questions about the top questions you're asked. You've dealt with so many people in trainings and through your website and through conversations. I'm wondering what the top 3 questions or issues that you see that new people who've never done private practice, they want to hear about.
Well, when people are brand new, almost all their questions are what I would call startup phase questions. Something about how do I get started? So they want all of the logistics of starting a practice. Do I need a business license? How do I choose an office? How do I, what about practice management systems? And then they wonder, how do I get clients? That's always a big question. And there's competition in the marketplace. So a lot of this is, how do you brand yourself? How do you decide what you'd like to be known for? And it doesn't just have to be your method. We're really attached to our methods as therapists, but we don't need to be that attached, because some of the people that want our services, they don't care so much about the methods, not as much as we do. They care about other things. They care about things like our location, or the hours that we work, or the way it will feel to be in our presence. And a lot of times as therapists, we don't know to put that at the front end, rather keeping it in the back end. So rapport building skills are really important, and new therapists need to rely on their rapport building because they feel unsure about their clinical skills because they're new. But I want them to feel more confident just in their ability to have a rapport. And as we know from a lot of research, that seems to be the healing element, the therapeutic alliance. So a lot of times it's discussions about that with new therapists. And then the last thing that they always need and want to know about is, how do I make money? What do I charge? How do I collect money? How do I even talk about money with somebody? Would anybody even pay me what I want to ask for? So there's a lot of what I would call money maturity that I end up talking with therapists about. If you didn't grow up in a family like I did, where money was discussed at the dinner table, and it was just a natural and not too stressful conversational way for the family to come together. If you don't have that, then you've just got all these anxieties and fears that most people have. So to be in business for yourself, and you've probably found this, Michael, just for yourself, because you have to deal with money in your business all the time, you have to grow up about it. You've got to take emotion out and irrational beliefs. And, just to say, during a time of crisis like we're in right now, the irrational beliefs are on the rise. That's one of the things I'm hearing a lot about.
If we have had this conversation a few months ago, and I said, hey, Lynn, what I've noticed at our workshops in Toronto, we have a lot of people who've come fairly regularly over many years, and I know them a little bit. I go up and say, hi, how are you doing? How's your private practice? Over and over and over, I hear it's booming. I have to refer. Things are really well. I'm adding more hours. I don't know what to do with myself. And this became a pattern. It started about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, where I hadn't noticed that before. Have you noticed that? What's happening in the States? And why is this happening?
Well, a lot more people have finally accepted therapy is okay. And in the States, we had Obamacare, which made mental health parity something that everybody who wanted to get a therapist could now charge it to insurance. So that opened a huge market of people that before couldn't afford therapy. But it's also just become, I think, in terms of a cultural issue, people are like feeling fine about seeing a therapist, where it used to be something that you would never talk about and hide. So you're right. In certain areas, people are overwhelmed. Clinicians are overwhelmed, and they're wanting to bring in more associates. And that it starts a whole interesting another level of business conversation. How do I handle staff and hire staff? And how do I manage staff? And how do I make sure that whatever the values and the philosophy of the practice are, once it becomes a group practice with more therapists, that those values are still in place? So I've been working with a lot of therapists about group practices over the last 5 years, because you're right, this has happened around the world.
I've certainly noticed that in Toronto group practices. A couple of years ago, someone came up and said, "Yeah, I just can't find enough people. My associates are growing. I need more associates." And we sent out a message to people and said, "Here's a possibility." She said she was overwhelmed with interest, and then it grew and grew and grew. I have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to people writing in questions. I see some on the screen. There are different kinds of practices. Some people are couples therapists, some people and individual therapists. Some people specialize in one or the other. And there are some people who are group therapists. And I'm wondering if there are different marketing approaches for those three kinds of therapy.
In general?
In general, yeah.
Yes, yeah, there are. And that's one way that people begin to niche themselves, is based on the way that they work, whether it's individually or with families or with groups. And I do like them to have a marketing plan that speaks to that. There used to be this great book called Therapy and Persuasion that came out, I think, in the 50s, right? And we forget that persuasion is an important element in therapy, that you have to help people come into therapy and understand the need for the way that you're working, which is obviously something you believe in. So sometimes there needs to be some education of your market and persuasion about why this is a good thing to do, why the family therapy versus individual is a really good method, for example.
I do have one more question as you were speaking. When you said marketing plan, I guess one thing you're saying, like, this is a whole new enterprise. You need a plan. You need to be thoughtful. It's not like there's a few easy ideas. I'm going to become, my private practice will grow. You're very much into discipline, working at it, and making a plan. Would you say that? Tell me more.
Well, this is a smart thing to do business-wise. Okay, so I want people to be educated as business owners, and really good business owners have some plans in place. They don't just go, what should I do today? Okay, any more than, let's say you were, I don't know, deciding that you wanted to redo your house, and you might not just go, okay, I wonder what I'll do today. Today, painting. Tomorrow, oops, I forgot. We needed to replace all the doors. Oops, that's going to be the painting. So I want you to treat your business kind of like it's a beloved aspect of your life, and being planful is a really good idea. And that way people can think, what do I do right now? What do I do in 3 months? What do I do in 6 months? What do I do a year from now? And you get better results.
Okay. I'm going to go to some questions. You just have to look at the side of the screen. Let me see. Is it unethical to call clients who have ended therapy to check in to see if they need support during this time? Recognition of the current environment. Is that ethical commerce?
Well, I think you need to decide, we all come from different theoretical backgrounds. So you need to decide, based on your theoretical background, if that kind of initiating contact with the client fits in with what you've been trained to do. And some therapists are going to say, yes, it does, and they're very comfortable, especially therapists that have worked at agencies where there was a lot of initiating with clients in between times to make sure people were okay. And others who are very psychoanalytically trained might say, no, I was trained not to ever do that. So you need to kind of make those decisions and stand on your theoretical training so that you could make a case for what you have done, what you've decided to do. And if you're not sure, reach out to another therapist for some peer supervision to see, is this just me and trying to deal with my own anxiety by reaching out? Or is this really grounded in a way that my certification and theoretical learnings would support?
Question from Allison. Hi there. Do you believe, this is about coaching certification, do you believe that therapists need coaching certification, or can we adapt our therapy skills to engage in coaching ethically and responsibly without further coaching training?
Well, at this time, no coaches are licensed. Okay, so it's not like psychotherapy or mental health or being a licensed professional counselor. There is no licensing. There's only certification. And we, in the International Coach Federation, which is the main certifying body, estimate that maybe 5% of those that are coaching are actually certified. So there are lots of people that are working as coaches without certification. And if that's true, my feeling is I would rather have therapists being coaches than anybody else, because I feel like we at least have our therapeutic knowledge and purposes and protections, and it's not too difficult for a lot of therapists to move into coaching. So you can purchase online or in libraries a lot of the books that coaching schools are using as curriculum. And so you could just educate yourself about what's being done right now in coaching programs in schools. The one last thing I want to say in terms of coaching programs, some are done at a university level, which is great, but the majority are not. The majority of coaching programs around the world are privately owned companies. So it's really a buyer beware market.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're accredited, I want you to do your diligence to make sure that you're getting into a program that you feel like is important and trustworthy, if that's the route that you choose to go. But you don't have to.
But if people do want to go that route, any suggestions of how to do due diligence on these different coaching programs?
I would certainly ask them what they'll allow you to participate in and to see before you pay. Can you take a class or two? Can you see their written material? Do they have a book that they've published that you can read? So what can you look at before that?
Okay, from Anna Maria asks, one assumes that there are no serious mental health diagnoses present with your coaching client. Otherwise, they may require a mental health therapist also, correct?
Correct. That's correct. So we want to stay in our own lane. So if I'm working with somebody as a coaching client and they are too depressed, too anxious, too traumatized to really take value in the coaching that we're doing, I want to refer out. And I've even had sometimes where I've worked with people who have both me as a coach and somebody else as a therapist, or me as their therapist and somebody else as a coach. The one thing, Anna Marie, that I don't want you to do is do both. So I don't feel like it's ethical to be somebody's coach and therapist. Let's say you started as a therapist and they graduated and you feel like, oh, now I could work with them as a coach. I don't like that idea, because I feel like, remember that bicycle? I feel like we're positioned in different ways as a therapist and as a coach, and it doesn't mix well. There's too much transference, and it just doesn't work as well.
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about those problems? Because I think some people would think, well, this has been a great client for 2 years, and now he or she has gotten their lives together, and they're saying, please coach me. What are some of the problems that would happen generally that would be a caution sign for you?
One of the problems that happens is if you've worked with somebody as a therapist first, they have transferential thoughts and feelings and issues about you. Maybe you don't have it about them, but believe me, they have it about you. They're idealizing you, they're de-idealizing you. And as a coach, what works as a coach is to flatten the hierarchy so that you work on solid ground. You can't completely do that, because you're a coach and a therapist and they're, your client and they're paying you. But you do things in your coaching to be less of a blank screen, to be more open, okay? And that doesn't work well. You can't go back and forth in that way.
Okay, thank you. And another question from Debbie in Toronto. As a coach, is your record and report keeping different than a therapist? What about reports and accountability, things like that?
I do mine exactly the same, because I'm a therapist and I'm a coach, not with the same people, but I have a practice. It's like two trains running in and out of the same station. I have two aspects of my business. working through the same office. So I just find, to make sure that I'm protecting my therapeutic licensure, that I do everything the same. I don't socialize with coaching clients, and I don't socialize with therapy clients. And I keep good records and reports, and it's just very similar. My billing, all those practices look very similar because I want to protect my therapeutic license.
Mhm. That leads me to ask you about any differences in things like confidentiality or any other issues that therapists are very concerned about, their ethical standards and their licensing, and the colleges that assure good and safe practice. Any differences with coaching?
There are differences. Coaching has a different ethical, um, I guess, I don't know what you'd call it, but depending on, we have these ethical rules and regulations as therapists, and those are even different depending on how you practice and what your degree is. And coaching has its own, and it's not as rigorous. It's not as rigorous. And coaches are working in so many different kinds of settings that a lot of what they do, it just doesn't fit for what we do. So it is really different. So what I choose to do when I work as a coach, whether it's a life coach or a business coach, I follow the most rigorous ethical rules, and that's my therapeutic rules.
Hmm. Here's a question. Do you recommend narrowing your niche as a therapist? If you narrow down too much, do you risk losing a wider range of clients?
This is a question I hear a lot, and especially from people that are new in practice, or it might be today for people that are finding that they've lost some clients and they need to go back out into the marketplace during the coronavirus. In business, it's considered a really good idea to be a big fish in a small pond, to narrow your offerings for marketing purposes. And that's what therapists get confused about. If you go out to advertise or to talk at network or to write, you can narrow. And it doesn't mean those are the only people you're going to see. You will start to attract all different kinds of clients, and you can work with anybody that you want. This is just for marketing purposes. And it's helpful because when you go out and meet people, they have a limited attention span. And it's best if they could just remember you for something, okay? And if you've already narrowed that down, that's what they'll remember you for. So don't get anxious and feel like I have to be everything to everybody. When you're marketing, it's better to have that niche.
Uh, we hear, okay, question. Someone asks, how do you reach clients who are on a huge waiting list at a hospital? They want therapy, they can't afford it. It's really a question of helping people in marginalized groups. And this may also speak to the question of fee charging and some of the guidelines around that. Maybe a little brief mention or two about that would be helpful for people.
So one of the things that's a truth about being in business is if you're in business and your private practice is a business, you have to make a profit. And that means you have to charge enough so that you make a profit after you take away your expenses. If you feel like your philosophy of service doesn't lend itself to that, it would be much better if you became a nonprofit. Then there would be other ways you could bring in income and other kinds of people that you could reach. That's why agencies and clinics are often nonprofit centers, because they want to reach out to people who can't afford high fees. And they get their income and they get grants from other places. So you have to decide early on in your business what your philosophy of service is. Are you going to be a business? In that case, you have to just fit within the rules of business. You have to charge enough so that at the end of the day, there's a profit.
Mm-hmm. Do you advise therapists in private practice to have a good resource list or have people in agencies they can refer to help? How do you smooth the way for people with agencies being overloaded quite often with long waiting lists? Is there any ways you can help people get some help from a nonprofit agency?
One of the things that you can do is you can have a reading list. You can have links to YouTube videos that are really helpful about mental health issues and things to do. Right now, there is so much written out in the marketplace in terms of blogs and their podcasts. So there's actually a lot of help for free out there. And if you have a specific area that you've targeted for your services, it'd be really nice to have those resources, on your website, to be able to give that away as an added value to people. There's nothing we can do about the problems in agencies and clinics. It's a much bigger problem than any one of us can resolve right now. I do know a lot of therapists are doing some pro bono hours, and that's something that you could do, but you have to watch your bottom line, again, if you're going to be a viable business. And we want you to stay in business and not to be impoverished. We want you to earn a decent living.
I want to follow this up. When I was in the agency world, and even many years ago, there were waiting lists. This is not new.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes an agency would start a group,
Mm-hmm.
and group therapy can be very, very helpful. I've noticed a lot of people haven't been trained in group therapy compared to the older days, which I remember. Do you see this happening in private practices, group work, or not so much?
It depends. So I know some people in private practice that run groups all day long, and it's a great service, and it's a great income for them, because you can, of course, leverage your time that way and earn more per hour than you would individually. There are other people who have found it very frustrating to run groups, that it's hard. It depends on the culture that you're in, but I'll say in the United States, unless you're in a 12-step program, most people are not familiar with being in groups, and they are not very comfortable with the idea of groups. So it's a harder sell to get people into groups. Some people like the idea of classes, and maybe it could be a class instead of a group, so it's psychoeducational. But I was trained in group therapy. I'm a big believer in group therapy, but I know that it was not always easy to keep ongoing groups going. And if you do short-term groups, it's like every 8 weeks or 12 weeks, you're starting over again. And that's tough. That's a lot of behind-the-scenes work.
Are you hearing of people in private practice joining together? Because I always learned it's good to have two leaders in a group, because there's so much going on to keep track of all the dynamics, to keep you honest, keep you supported. Do you see that happening?
I think it's really important. And, in my experience, what I've done is I have joined existing associations. When I didn't have the kind of a group that I needed, I've started my own. I've started peer support groups. I've started peer supervision groups. I've started a mastermind group. I'm just getting ready to step in and be president of a clinical social work association in the Washington, D.C. area of about 1,000 members, because I just feel like a rising tide lifts all boats. We need to be together in this, especially. And so I really admire anybody that's listening right now. If you don't have a network or a support group that's right for you, think about creating one.
We've had some questions about that, because I've heard therapists talk about one of the downsides is the feeling of isolation. And they don't have the water cooler, they don't have the lunchtime, they don't have the whatever to get together with colleagues, as well as the formal supervision. And you're speaking to that. Any suggestions of how best to build a support group when you're in private practice
These
or
days,
supervision?
it's really easy these days, so that you could decide, what do you want this group to be. So in the past, a lot of people were using my workbook, that's the yellow book, the second book, to use that. It's 12 months to your ideal private practice, as a way to have a support group for a year with other therapists. And I give you the basically what to do each month. And they found that really helpful. But let's say you just want a group for now, just to be able to talk with other clinicians. I feel pretty sure that if you looked around, even on Psychology Today, or just to clinicians that you know, and said, let's meet on Zoom, or let's meet on some platform and just talk, once a week or once a month, to have the support of each other, that you'd get a lot of people saying, yes, I'd like that. And that makes you a leader. And, during a crisis, this is a time to show some leadership for things that are important to you.
Someone wrote in that at different times, she would go to networking kind of lunches or breakfasts with meetings with other professionals who weren't in the helping fields, but they could be insurance or whatever, as a way to meet people and marketing her practice. Obviously, that's not happening now, but when the world resumes, hopefully one day sooner than later,
Yeah.
is that a way to build a practice?
It is, and people are still around. They're just at home. But that, if you find lists of people who are, that you can access, who are located around your small business, and you want to reach out to them and say, hi, just wanted to chat and find out how you are, and we don't know each other, but so-and-so suggested I call, or I saw your ad here. I think that you'd find a lot of welcoming responses, because everybody is going through this together. We're all isolated right now. I know some people are working hard from home, but I'm just talking about if you are not one of those people and you feel like I'd like to do more for my business right now. Or
I'm curious, do you know if these networking things are happening online now? Are there groups that say now we're meeting online?
Yeah, a lot of them are, at least in my
Really?
area. Yeah, a lot of them are. But, it takes somebody being comfortable and familiar with the platform and then
Yeah.
sending out word to everybody else. But yes.
And also, enter that world of business people and how to present yourself. It can be a challenge for some people, but probably a very good learning experience, and they need to prepare a
Yeah.
mindset or an approach.
Yeah. And there's a lot of preparation that you can do. What would I say if I was asked, how are you doing, or what are you doing now, or how's your online work going? What would I like to say? So it's a good business skill to prepare ahead of time before you need to answer questions like those.
Mm-hmm. So if people want to look online for networking possibilities right now, um, how do they find out if they've never been a member of a networking group? How to join one? How to decipher which might be best for them in their community or maybe in the world now?
I think that they would just start Googling. They'd start to research and see what fits for them, and see what's local, and see what's national. So, for example, I belong to this big national coaching federation. Anybody can join that. And they're doing a lot of things online for people. And then locally, I belong to 2 different local associations. They're offering things. And then I've got groups that I've developed myself. And we're making sure that we stay in touch.
Well, I'm just noticing very practical questions about charging different rates for coaching or psychotherapy, or giving different receipts. What are the policies around that?
Well, I like you to have an idea of why you're charging what you're charging. So I don't like you just to pull a fee out of the air and say that's going to be my fee. So I want it to be something that, where you look at some criteria, like what's the market, what's the value of this, what does it take for me to offer this kind of service, what's included in this kind of service. And if you do that, chances are you won't find that your coaching fee or your group fee are the same as your individual therapy fee. That things will be different because these services are different, and they have a different market, and maybe they require different things from you. So, for example, when I'm working as a life coach, I include email support in my services. So my fee is more than it is as an individual psychotherapist, because I'm working more. I'm planning to spend more time with this person, even though some of it's going to be for accountability online or by email.
Is there a difference in access in regular in-office or now online practice between coaching and therapy? Would you possibly see more people or have a phone call in different ways between therapists and coaches?
I think it depends, because everybody works so differently. And I know some therapists are talking about working in half-hour sessions,
Mm-hmm.
especially with younger populations, that they feel like there was an interesting article that I just read that somebody sent online to one of the support groups I'm in about why people are uncomfortable with video therapy, that they don't like to just be looking at themselves or looking at somebody else this intently. So, there may be different ways that you need to work online to make your clients comfortable, and then there'll be a different pricing strategy with that.
I think we have time for one more from Sarah. Given you are an expert in establishing private practice, what do we need to do differently in terms of marketing and to make our private practice viable now that it's an online, this is really the topic of our 2 hours, but maybe a few hints for people, what they're doing now, what they can do now?
So this is what we're going to talk about, specific to the coronavirus. And before I start marketing, I really want you to have like a snapshot of where your practice is today and what your goals are. I don't want you to just try something that you think like, I'll just do Google AdWords, because it's expensive. And if you haven't done it for a good reason, you might just end up throwing money away. So I'd really prefer that you look at a few steps of a plan and think about, who am I trying to attract? Where am I trying to get to? And then let's look at, given things today, and given that practices are online right now, what would be the best use of your energy and money? So I'm afraid I just can't throw out, this is the thing to do, other than if there's one thing for you to do, it would be connect. Connect to your previous referral sources or existing referral sources, or to your other colleagues. Just stay in connection, because if people are overwhelmed and need to refer, they'll be thinking of you. You'll be more front of the mind to them. So that would be just a basic, simple thing, is be on the phone more, be on the email more, let people know you're still working and you're around.
Well, that's maybe a good place to end. Speaking of connection, thank you so much for taking this time and connecting with lots of people. We'll be here again next Tuesday for people who would like more. There is a poll question we're asking people to fill in. It takes about 20 seconds. Basically, we want to know if this worked for you. Were you satisfied with joining our lunch today? And did the technology work? I think it's 3 questions. It's where it says poll, the little next to questions up there. If you want to find out what we're doing, our different programs, our lunches, our mini webinars, and our spring series, which are full-day workshops, please go to our website, leadingedgeseminars.org. And you can always contact me at michael@leadingedgeseminars.org. Lynn, thanks again. You always just have so much information and a delight. So I so much appreciate you taking the time. And thank you all, and everyone have a good day as possible. We'll get over this. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.